And now, increasingly, people are being managed and not represented. And somehow that is an issue that has to be tackled, because if we don't provide a democratic opportunity, one of three things will happen. Either people will become cynical, and cynicism destroys politics and opens the way to dictatorship, or they will just abstain, which will destroy the legitimacy of elected governments, or they'll turn to violence, because the history of the world has been a history of violence, and sometimes, indeed many times, it's been discovered the only way to resolve that is to provide democratic rights.
And there are some long overdue constitutional changes we should make in Britain.
I think we should elect our head of state. I'm not one of those who criticises the Queen because she didn't pick the job. But why shouldn't we elect our head of state to represent us? And if the Queen lived at Buckingham Palace and changed the Guard funded by the British Tourist and Holiday Board, fine, that's great. Not an attack on the royal family, but we ought to elect our head of state.
The real problem is that all the powers of the Crown, the so-called Crown prerogatives, are exercised by the Prime Minister, and he doesn't have to consult Parliament at all. And these powers include the right to go to war, to sign treaties, to make appointments, just like the medieval king. If there's one lesson to be learned from the past, it is that all real progress comes from below. And that means we have to organise. It was, of course, through self-organisation that Parliament itself was forced to grant the vote to everyone and then accept the welfare state.
I think we have to fight again for the right of working people to organise themselves in trade unions, not just nationally, but internationally.
I think it can be done because this generation understands better than any of the previous generations what's going on. The internet helps them to understand what's happening and helps them to organise. And these great big global movements that are building up are based on the idea that you'll never have peace if you don't have social justice, respect human rights, work internationally, and build democracy. So this generation has got to take on itself the responsibility for carrying the campaign for democracy from the national to the international scale.
I mean, a couple of million people in London in 2003 at the time of the Iraq War, and similarly there were demonstrations in the United States, all over Europe, all over the world, against the war. And this really represents a movement as powerful, in my opinion, as potentially powerful as the Chartists and the trade unions were in the early 19th century. Now, this is a phenomenon that people in power will have to think about, because if those in power think they can forever disregard those they govern, they will make a great mistake. No one in power really wants democracy, because democracy would challenge their power structures and their authority. So anyone who comes out with a democratic idea is dismissed as unrepresentative or a troublemaker or an extremist or something. And in this way, the full flow of a public debate about alternatives is being extinguished. We're the first generation in the whole of human history that has the money and the technology to resolve the world's problems. And we pour it in to nuclear weapons and wars, whereas a fraction of the budget spent on the Iraq War could transform the prospects for Africa, for example. It's an old progressive saying, we are many, they are few. But if you want to do it, you've got to do it yourself. No good waiting for some new leader to gallop onto the stage on a white horse and wave at you and say, vote for me and I'll solve your problems. That's no solution. You have to do it yourself.
The human race are like survivors in a lifeboat with one loaf of bread. There are only three ways of distributing it. You sell it so the rich gobble it up. You fight for it so the strong get it all, or you share it. And that is the choice we have to make. And that can only really be done in a democratic world. And that's why democracy is worth working for.
So why was the stone circle built and what was it used for? On the day of the summer solstice, we join John Suchet and Kate Sanderson for Stonehenge Live, coming up in just a moment on 5.